I typically say nostalgia. Conceptually, at least, doesn't guide what I choose to cover here on the show. When it comes to picking those games I do want to cover, I tend to pick those I feel are neat. And these days that means more of what's new to me rather than retreading old ground. Because sometimes, not everything you really dig back in the day holds up as much as you'd like it to. Being it so happens that it's my birthday, at least when this episode goes out, and that a large part of the year so far has seemed to be revisiting the library of the Game Boy Advance, I can't help but feel it's time to highlight some of its games I feel are quite interesting. Now, not all of the games featured here are the stereotypical hidden gems, nor would this list cover my absolute favourites for the platform. It's just, I think they're neat. So, whether they're worth sinking your teeth into, or trying out for the sake of curiosity into some unique takes on game development of the early 2000s, well, I hope you're going to find them as interesting as I do. To kick things off, I feel it's best to keep things retro with some retro compilations. Considering when the GBA launched, it's no surprise that there were a larger than usual number of them on the machine. It just also happens to be reinforced by how many teams treated that device like a portable Super NES, as they both shared quite a few features in common. First off, we've got Activision Anthology, ported by Aspyr in 2002. This one offers a compilation of Activision's Atari 2600 catalogue. What's neat here is that amongst the 50-odd games included, some are unreleased games by the company, along with some homebrew releases from more recent years. As you'd expect, all their classics are present, from Enduro to River Raid, or Barnstorming to Space Shuttle. Even Pitfall 2 makes an appearance, which is a genuine win here thanks to it being a more complex game with the DPC chip the emulation needs to cover. What makes this a special release though is not through the sheer number of games on offer, but the extras. That includes full copies of each game's instructions, which is one neat trick, but you also get scans of the box and cartridge art. The cherry on the cake though is the support for saving your high scores, but also letting you virtually win those iconic Activision patches. Though the novelty of this release might have worn off thanks to the proliferation of generic emulation devices, at the time it was truly a novelty to be able to play these games on the go, and especially considering how solid the emulation of them all is, it makes a package which is well worth trying out should you have that 2600 itch that you want to scratch. Next, we've got Atari's Anniversary Advance. Like many retro collections for the Game Boy Advance, the selections here are focused on arcade games, with 6 on offer: Asteroids, Battlezone, Centipede, Missile Command, Super Breakout, and Tempest. The choice to include some vector-based classics is well regarded, though the results can be a little mixed at times. Asteroids had moments where displaying a large number of objects on screen would slow things down quite noticeably compared to the original game. I also found Battlezone to be a little sluggish as well, though that one's probably not a surprise because it's not a simple game to emulate, the amount of 3D geometry on screen, so the results can be considered quite impressive for the platform. Although the trio of Raster games are far smoother in comparison, I find that all 6 are still playable enough to enjoy. And besides, it's not like you're going to be aiming for those Twin Galaxies top scores should you be playing these versions of the games. There's also one final surprise included, a small trivia quiz which throws up a variety of questions regarding the 6 arcade games included. These ones actually offered a few surprises which stumped me, and with a decent variety of questions on offer, I'm sure though any story player is going to memorise them all in due course anyway. For a quick dash of arcade fun, it's a package that's certainly worth giving a try, but like with Activision Anthology, these days there are more convenient ways to enjoy them should you be wanting to play them on the go. But that shouldn't rule it out for the historical curiosity value. Keeping to the arcade theme is Konami's collector's series, Arcade Advance. Here we've got a selection of 6 early games from Konami: Frogger, Scramble, Time Pilot, Gyros, Yi Are Kung Fu, and Russian Attack, or Green Beret depending on where you're from. Where the other compilations we've seen so far relied on lots of emulation trickery to get them running well on the trusty GBA, the games in this collection have been fully reprogrammed for maximum performance. It also means you get both the original versions of these games, outside of the altered music in Frogger, and some enhanced versions. These can be enabled on each game by inputting the classic Konami code prior to starting them. What you'll get is different experiences for different games. Frogger and Scramble both offer enhanced visuals, while Gyros adds extra stages which, when beaten, give you a permanent weapon upgrade. Time Pilot blesses the player with rapid fire and an extra stage, whilst Yi Are Kung Fu lets you play with all the fighters in 2-player mode. As for Russian Attack, you get more lives, which you'll certainly need, and a few extra stages at the end of the game. All up, it's a pack which offers a great set of games, with some extra benefits for those who've mastered the originals or wanting something a little different from what they're familiar with. Most of the throwback packs released on the Game Boy Advance tended to be based around arcade games, but sometimes you'll get something which originated on a home microcomputer. Pinball Challenge Deluxe was one of those which greatly impressed me on discovering it, as it's a port of none other than the iconic Amiga pinball games Pinball Dreams and its first follow-up, Pinball Fantasies. This gives you 8 tables to try out, with plenty of time needed trying to learn the ins and outs of each of them in order to rack up the best scores out there. Though it should be said, like with Activision Anthology earlier, in Space Year 2022 there are other ways which are far better to enjoy these tables on the go. But honestly, it doesn't rule out the experience that you get checking them out here and being as impressed as I was on discovering them back in the day. Even with the extra scrolling needed on account of the GBA's smaller screen resolution, they feel just as responsive and playable as they did back on the Amiga during the 1990s. At the time of release, in order to enjoy these games, you would have had to be emulating an Amiga unless you held on to your original hardware. So, this release in making them available for a new generation is something I feel is a great move. And even then, it's probably still worth having them to play today, should you want the option. I've always been a sucker for seeing hardware pushed to its limits and beyond by creative development teams. Seeing games benefit from smart technical trickery, especially when they result in ones that you'll enjoy, is one of those things that will make anyone's jaw drop. And that's what this next batch of games is about, the games which I felt really pushed the GBA to its limits. The first of these I want to look at is Codemasters' Colin McRae Rally 2.0, adapted by Spellbound Interactive and released in 2002. Serving as a downscaled take on the PC PlayStation Rally Sim, the presentation absolutely channels those original versions from the outset, with the game featuring most of the same game modes available. It's when you take to the road that the game shows its wizardry in action. Many races on the GBA tend to use a modernised take on the tricks pioneered for the Super NES, featuring vehicle sprites driving over courses built out of tile maps, taking advantage of the rotation and scaling capabilities of the hardware. Whilst the course here is rendered in that style, the real wizardry comes from the choice of having your car rendered out as a 3D model. This really nails the rally feeling as you watch it bump, bounce, twist and turn as you move about racing at full tilt. It surprisingly nails the feeling you get driving these cars on these twisty off-road courses as you work to complete each as quickly as possible whilst working to ensure your car avoids damage which you'll need to repair between every 2 races. Sitting back to play this one as I grabbed footage reminded me just how great the experience feels. There's some tight controls on offer, and there is quite a challenge to master those tracks and complete them as quickly as possible. And that's a thing which is just nailed down by how well the physics are for a game of this time. I mean, granted, if you want a rally experience on the go, there's more modern games that deliver it well, but for 2002 and for the GBA platform, this just is amazing to experience. Something else which was quite a surprise on the Game Boy Advance was the surprising number of first-person shooters which appeared on the platform. Not all of them were great though. In fact, there was quite the spectrum in quality in what was released, and one of the better ones out there was Duke Nukem Advance, developed by Taurus Games and published by Take-Two in 2002. In this adventure, Duke starts out at Area 51, having to take on a bunch of aliens who have taken up residence and ready to cause a whole bunch of trouble for humanity. As you'd expect, it takes the formula established by Duke Nukem 3D, but compacts it down for the portable hardware, and offers quite a satisfactory take on the experience in the process. If anything, I'd say it goes one step better, as some of the more tacky elements of Duke Nukem 3D aren't here at all, which is no surprise, and it makes it set up a little better as a result after all this time. Something else I also dig is how the game has been reworked for the GBA's controls, as what you have on offer works great on the layout, and it still retains a degree of the interactivity Duke is known for. Duke Nukem Advance is one of those games I feel really shows what you can pull off when you don't just adapt a game directly, but rather focus on reworking it to play to the strengths and capabilities of the target platform. It's a fun first-person shooter that's challenging, and it just feels so much better than many of the others which would appear before and after. When it comes to some of the picks in this video, we're certainly going to see a few reflections in the mirror, so to speak. And none of those is more apparent than with V-Rally 3, converted by Valles and Dubale, published by Infogrames in 2002. You may be thinking it's just another rally game, but the thing is, it takes the opposite approach to Colin McRae 2.0, in that this time, it's the environment which is displayed in polygonal 3D, with the cars displayed as sprites. So the driving may not carry the weight which CMR 2.0 offers, but honestly, think of it more as an arcade experience over a simulation one, a light one at least. It's got one trick I really love though, cockpit view. Though only available in the main V-Rally mode, having such a view on a handheld racer feels really special to me. It certainly did back then, and in coming back to it after all this time, it still feels it. V-Rally 3 offers a fun racing experience for those who aren't up for the more simulation-focused stylings of CMR 2.0, and again makes for a shining example of what the hardware can pull off with developers working to punch, well above their weight. And for the final technically accomplished game, and yeah, it's another adaptation. This time, Wing Commander Prophecy, ported by Raylight Studios and published by Destination Software in 2003. This is one of the ones which, back in the day, I happened to follow the development of, from its earliest days as a generic space combat game, to Raylight being able to obtain the license and it turning into a fully fledged port of the latest, even though it was several years old, PC game. Space combat games might be simpler than others out there, but having a variety of craft on screen, rendered in full 3D, alongside the cockpit, really shows how much the hardware has been pushed here. There's a lot of neat details included on a visual front, such as the laser blasts lighting up the cockpit as you fire them. It's also a game which demonstrates how an original game of 3 CDs of content can be squished down to a single small cartridge here. Replacing all of its FMV sequences with a mixture of in-game cutscenes and text-based dialogue sequences allows the original story to come through mostly intact. Unsurprisingly, there's a few minor aspects of the gameplay missing here, but in the long run, I think those were all fair compromises for the time and the platform. Wing Commander Prophecy may be one of those which sounds like an incredibly unlikely game at first, but it really lives up to your expectations, as long as you're not expecting 100% accuracy to the PC original. But what you get here is a fun, challenging game that really translates the core of it well for play on the go. One of the big joys I've had over the years is discovering stuff which turns out to be far more interesting than I might have expected at first glance. Whether it's entries in franchises which are more interesting than expected, or games which came out of the blue to knock my socks off, there's plenty out there which surprised me in the library, and in the case of the Game Boy Advance, that's what we're looking at with these next few titles. The first of these is Deadly Skies, also known as Air Force Delta Storm, developed by Mobile 21 and published by Konami in 2002. On other machines, this series is Konami's take on the air combat stylings of the Ace Combat series, with plenty of fast-paced aerial action, which is translated here surprisingly well, thanks to the shift in perspective. Missions are viewed from an overhead view, which takes advantage of the GBA's scaling and rotation hardware as you adjust your altitude, though you've just got to be careful to watch you don't hit the ground. The formula could be seen as simplistic, but there's plenty of challenge on offer as you dodge enemy fire and work through its plentiful missions. There is quite a large number of them on offer, usually involving you taking out a number of targets, whether airborne or situated on the ground. One early one I dug was a slower paced one, where you're in charge of an opera fighter, and you're navigating it through a tight, twisting canyon, trying to reach a distant target up against the clock. The challenge comes from the limited room for maneuverability, and you've got some enemy combatants you need to take out, so there's quite a thrilling thing as you're watching the distance close and getting ready for threats. There are plenty of others like it throughout the game, but that's the one that really stuck in my head. So, if you're wanting that fast-paced aerial combat fix, The Deadly Skies is one which is well worth taking the time to check out. It is a far, far more enjoyable game than the actual conversion of Ace Combat Advance, which came out several years after it. Next, we have Dotstream, part of the Bit Generation series developed by Skip Limited and published by Nintendo in 2006. Even though I put a video together on this game quite a few months ago, I still had to include it here because, let's face it, Dotstream is incredible. A minimalist racing game in which you take control of a trace and have to negotiate some crafty courses with some precise piloting, where in order to take the lead, you'll need plenty of reactions and skill to master those courses and know which route to take, when you need to turn, and how best to deal with your rivals who, if you're not careful, can push you into dangerous spots. It might look relatively simplistic at first glance, but underneath the aesthetic lies some tight controls and an amazing soundtrack. Again, I've covered this one in detail in its own video, and I really recommend you check it out if it piques your interest. Dotstream feels so different compared to many other racing games for the GBA, and it makes for a great one to check out if you're after something very different. And also if you love its aesthetic. I just can't talk about how awesome that is. Well worth checking out. A new installment in a long-running series like Gradius probably shouldn't be much of a surprise. But, quite frankly, until I really sat down with this one, Gradius Advance, or Gradius Galaxies, or Gradius Generations, depending on where you're from, I never really clicked with the series. Once again, you're in charge of the legendary Vic Viper fighter, and you've got to blast your way through waves of Bacterian forces. As with many of the prior games, you do have the option to customize which set of power-ups you'll upgrade through as you fight through. Once you fly into battle, many of the classic Gradius tropes apply and are executed quite well, but it brings some neat tricks to the table as well. One of those for me is in its second stage, which has you blasting your way through giant sheets of ice. These take a number of hits to destroy, and should you make a mistake and die, it can be quite tense working your way through them until you've collected a few power-ups to eventually make taking them out a bit of a breeze. Now, Gradius Advance might not be the first game of the series which comes to mind, but it's honestly the best portable installment. At least prior to the arcade versions being brought over in various compilations many years later. For the most part in this video, I wanted to avoid talking about the traditional Nintendo staples, but at some point we're going to have to cross the line and talk about the plumber. And of his adventures on the Game Boy Advance, the one which is most interesting to me is not one of his conventional platforming outings, but rather Mario vs. Donkey Kong from 2004. This one's inspired by the amazing Donkey Kong update released for the original Game Boy, which took the basic platforming action and marries it up with some tricky puzzling. Here, Mario is hot on the heels of Donkey Kong as he tries to recover stolen mini Mario toys. Each level tasks you with finding the key to the exit, then finding the various presents and tricks within. Getting to the end of each world pits you up against Kong, trying to find a way to defeat him by throwing various items located around the level, whilst avoiding Kong's own attacks. Then there's a stage which takes cues from Lemmings, which has you leading the world's pack of mini Marios to its exit as quickly as possible. This one opens up being relatively breezy, but it's not long before you get some devilish challenges you've got to work your way through. All up, if you're needing a reason to get some head-scratching action on your GBA, then this is certainly one of the best games out there for it. It takes some familiar things, adds it up, and makes a pretty cool little game out of it. There was, of course, a series of titles which built on from this, but this first one is probably the easiest to get into and check out. The last one in this pack of games is certainly a big surprise. I'd not really gotten into the prior Medal of Honor games, mainly because I was playing PC games at the time, and it was quite a while before they started appearing there. But Medal of Honor Infiltrator takes many of the concepts they pioneered, but has them play out in 2D, which makes for a game which feels a bit like a spiritual follow-up to Airborne Ranger. Seriously. Infiltrator has you undertaking a number of operations, which you'll be performing solo. You'll be up against some serious odds in the campaign, with missions alternating between run-and-gun affairs and those where you'll need some discretion and patience to stick your way up to enemy soldiers and dispatch them whilst taking out targets. This one is quite a challenge. It took a fair few shots for me to make progress in what I showed here, but watching a mission come together after successful attempts makes you feel like you've really managed to survive some tough odds. Medal of Honor Infiltrator feels like a game which might have best suited the era of 16-bit computing, an era where games took those concepts offered by their 8-bit forebears, with added extra mechanics to offer players a serious thrill amongst the wider challenge. This is one which really makes for a more thoughtful run-and-gun action game, and it works very well on the hardware as a result. This final group of games are what I call my Tentpoles. Well, some of them anyway. They're the games which got me engrossed with the GBA system, or continued to do so during the time when it was my main portable gaming choice. So there's not much more to say than that really, so time to dive in. Having to deal with a load of commuting, there was always going to be one game which made sense for plenty of train trips between home and my studies, and that was Intelligent Systems' Advance Wars, released back in 2001. If there's any one game in this list which offers a sharp challenge underneath its aesthetics, it's certainly this. Taking charge of the Orange Star Army, you're pitted against a variety of its neighbours, battling it out in the means of turn-based strategy. Within its many missions, you'll have to figure out the right way to complete each successfully. In fact, depending on the scenario, there can be quite the puzzling required to get the right approach. Advance Wars offers a load of goodies within it. An incredibly comprehensive tutorial to get you familiar with how its mechanics works, a lengthy campaign, and plenty of maps which you can enjoy against friends in its multiplayer modes. Now, there's still a lot of it I never really mastered, as it's a game which can be very tough if you're not ready for it, but it's an excellent slice of strategic action for when you just want to sit back and ponder how best to manage little soldiers in the heat of battle on the go. One place where the Game Boy Advance really happened to find its ground is with the old non-linear exploratory platform game, which is where I felt the Castlevania series, at least the non-linear exploratory ones, really found its footing. Yes, Symphony of the Night is an iconic game, but it never really had success at launch, rather getting it in that sort of cult status afterwards. But the iteration on the GBA leading up to Aria of Sorrow, the third of the games released for it, is the one which kind of really got it, and it's no surprise as to why. Taking charge of one Soma cruise, you find yourself trapped in Dracula's castle after visiting a shrine. As you'd expect, you've got to explore the castle, battle hordes of demons, and use their collected abilities to take on increasingly powerful enemies. It takes the formula established by Symphony of the Night, but honestly, really nails it in the execution. It's streamlined enough for portable play, but has quite an expansive castle, so it's no short challenge to master. It'll take you quite a while to work your way through, especially if you're a completionist, because you're no doubt going to want to get every enemy's soul and expose the entire map. Aria of Sorrow is by far the best of the trilogy released on the GBA, and I'm sure that's one which ranks high for any fan of the exploratory platformer entries in the series, rather than its more traditional action-focused roots. It might be an odd view to take, but when it comes to a long-running series, I feel there's always a trace of something which needs to run through all its entries. Deep down, I think it's why I never clicked with F-Zero Maximum Velocity, the first of the F-Zero games released on the GBA. But on picking up its sequel, F-Zero GP Legend, and hearing those familiar track themes, it felt just as good as it always does. Released back in 2004, this one serves as a tie-in to the anime series released around the same time, which adds one big feature to the game in its story mode. Here you'll play through a bunch of small stories based on various characters from that side of the universe. These all use the familiar racing mechanics and twist them up in neat ways. When you're done with that mode, there's plenty of classic F-Zero racing as well, with new tracks, new locales, and yes, new hazards to negotiate as well. What I really dig with this game is how they've brought in features from F-Zero X, like the ability to side ram your rivals and having boosts drain your energy, instead of having a single one to use per lap. F-Zero GP Legend offers up a serious amount of thrills for any fan of the series, and once again is another racer on the machine which really stands out a bit as a result. Outside of the F-Zero games, there weren't really many futuristic racers on the machine. And this, for me, is probably the best one of the lot on the machine.
Final lap.
When it comes to courting controversy, there's only one game on the list which doesn't, and that was Metroid Fusion from 2002. After a lengthy wait from 1994 Super Metroid, Samus Aran's fourth adventure shakes things up by restructuring the world to feel more suitable for portable play. Her mission takes place on a research station, which has gone silent after taking possession of alien specimens infected by a newly discovered organism. The controversy comes in the form of the game's structure, where Samus is briefed by an AI who also provides direction for where you need to go next. It's easy to understand why this was done. Sure, the series is famous for offering little guidance to players, but when it comes to a portable experience, they really help when your sessions can be interrupted by variable lengths of time. You can't sit there and justify saying, hey, I've got 3 hours to play this, I've got a bit of time between a trip here or waiting for something else. This also applies to the maps, as the station itself is made up of smaller modules that you may be locked into from time to time as well. Underneath it all there, the same exploratory gameplay is there, along with that collector's urge to find as many of the energy tanks, missile tanks, and bomb tanks as possible. But it's also a game which manages to pull off some incredibly unnerving sequences, thanks to the main antagonist, a clone of Samus herself. Metroid Fusion may not offer the sense of isolation or wonder Super Metroid did, but honestly, this game is no less an experience for that, and covers that up with many of its own benefits, and is certainly one of my top games for the system. One more of my top games is, surprisingly, another of Samus' adventures. Released in 2004, Metroid Zero Mission is a remake of the very first Metroid from 1986. Except when it's not. Metroid Zero Mission is greatly expanded over the original game. But not only that, it also introduces many of the quality of life improvements added in Super Metroid and Metroid Fusion. The result is an adventure with greatly added scope, and even more secrets to find, as you'll also leave the underground caverns of the original world. It contrasts mechanically with Metroid Fusion quite nicely, as where Samus' mission is tightly guided in that game, the path in Zero Mission is less so. Sure, it points you in the general direction you need to head to from time to time, but this mostly leads to unknown areas. Or even if it doesn't, the route there won't always be the direct one you think it might be. So you'll find there's plenty of exploration to be doing nonetheless, which is a great thing in my book. It's very core to what Metroid is. On top of that, it also offers plenty of surprises, especially in its endgame as well. Ones which are honestly worth experiencing for yourself, so even if you've mastered the original game but not really played this, there is plenty more out there to experience than you might have thirst for. Whenever I think of what makes for a superlative retro revival, Metroid Zero Mission well and truly stakes top spot in my mind. This is of course from its execution, but more importantly, how it does more than just walk us down the same paths and caverns the original game did back in 1986. Now that's a load of games to check out. I had wanted to cover a few more in the video, but time is always a bit of a curse when it comes to a project like this. Regardless though, I hope you go check some of them out. Granted, most are going to require a journey to the shady side of the internet, though in the case of Aria of Sorrow, it is part of the Castlevania Advanced collection for modern platforms, which lets you play tidied up versions of the 3 games released on the GBA. On a similar front, Advance Wars faces a similar situation, with a new release originally planned for early 2022, but currently delayed due to the current global situation. Hopefully that one gets rescheduled for a release soon, and it does justice to it and its immediate follow-up as well. I hope you're genuinely interested enough in the video that you take the time out to check some of these games. If you did and found one you felt was interesting and enjoyable, why not let me know down in the comments. And with that, there's not really much more to add but the usual things. If you appreciated the video, do hit the thumbs up button. For more relaxed, thoughtful looks at interesting games on vintage platforms, do consider subscribing and, enabling notifications so you can be told when new ones drop and are available to watch. But as always, I think I'd just like to thank you all very much for taking the time out to enjoy the video.